I learned how quickly loyalty can turn to humiliation. My husband, Frederick, abandoned me for a younger woman named Tessa, claiming he deserved a new life. He took our children overseas to attend his wedding, dumping me with a text telling me to be gone when he returned. The world expected me to crumble. Instead, I studied legal papers, spoke to contractors, and prepared something no one anticipated. If he wanted me erased from our home, then our home would no longer exist for him to claim. The foundations of that house were built on my sacrifices. Its destruction would become my revenge. My name is Marion Caldwell, and at 62 years old, I never imagined that the man I spent 4 decades with would announce the end of our marriage over breakfast. Frederick didn't stutter, hesitate, or show guilt. He spoke with cold certainty, declaring he had fallen in love with someone younger, someone who made him feel alive again. I stared at him, numb, while the walls of our $1 million home seemed to close in. He said I'd become old, boring, and predictable, as if aging were a crime. I reminded him of the sacrifices we made together, career compromises, raising children, building a life, but he dismissed them with a shrug. The marriage I built with devotion he discarded like expired property. And in that moment I felt betrayal, not sadness, ignite. When our children heard the news, I expected shock, sympathy, maybe anger on my behalf. Instead, their reaction sliced deeper than Frederick's words. They defended him. My daughter claimed people fall out of love, and my son insisted I should let Dad be happy. They were charmed by his narrative, that he deserved a second chance, that leaving an aging marriage was courageous. They believed his claims that I held him back and didn't appreciate him. Their eagerness to attend his overseas wedding felt like a knife twisting. I wasn't simply losing a husband, I was watching my own children treat me like collateral damage. The sense of abandonment was overwhelming, but also clarifying. Loyalty can be paper thin when people stand to benefit. The most devastating moment came not face to face, but through a screen. Frederick texted me while finalizing wedding details overseas. "Be gone when we return. I hate old things. I deserve a new life." It was the type of message a landlord sends a stranger, not a husband to a wife. My hands trembled as I read it. He didn't ask, he commanded. The man who once held my hand now treated me like clutter. He didn't want a divorce, he wanted erasure. The text made one thing clear: this wasn't about love. It was about ego, image, and the illusion of youth. That sentence didn't break me. It awakened a resolve I didn't know I possessed. As he flaunted his engagement on social media, I watched the comments roll in: congratulations, admiration, envy. Photos of tropical beaches, champagne, and dress fittings painted a perfect picture. The younger woman, Tessa, posed beside him, glowing with smug triumph. He paraded his midlife fantasy like a trophy. Our children posted selfies from airports, oblivious to the cruelty of excluding me. The world saw joy. I saw betrayal wrapped in glamour. Friends whispered excuses, saying I should be understanding, that men change. No one recognized the humiliation of being replaced and told to vacate your own home. Every smiling photo fueled something inside me, not bitterness, but strategy. Reality sharpened when Frederick's attorney emailed legal notices urging me to vacate the property. His arrogance was astonishing. He assumed he held full ownership despite my contributions. He underestimated the years I spent learning the finances, managing contractors, and contributing from my own inheritance. He threatened to send movers to clear my belongings. He even suggested I would be happier elsewhere, as if displacement were a gift. That threat didn't push me out, it pushed me into action. The home he thought was his kingdom was built on shared labor, shared money, and shared dreams. If he wanted to wield power, I would meet him with knowledge. Instead of surrender, I sought counsel. The lawyer I met, Ms. Donnelly, listened carefully, reviewed deeds, contracts, and marriage records. Her eyebrows lifted as she uncovered overlooked details: joint ownership clauses, inheritance rights, permits in my name, and a quiet, forgotten contract that placed renovation authority solely with me. Suddenly, eviction wasn't inevitable. The home's legal foundation was not his throne, it was our battlefield. Ms. Donnelly didn't encourage revenge, she pointed out leverage. She reminded me that dignity sometimes requires defense. Leaving wouldn't be a retreat, it would be a strategy. And strategy opened doors I never knew existed. The moment I stepped out of that office, I knew surrender was over. I drove home, not to pack my belongings, but to evaluate every inch of the house that symbolized my sacrifices. If Frederick viewed me as disposable, then the home he coveted would become equally disposable. I studied documents, contacted contractors anonymously, and researched demolition permits. I wasn't driven by rage alone, I was driven by justice. He wanted to return from his honeymoon to a new life. Fine, he would return to no life at all. The house he expected to claim would become a memory. And that realization didn't terrify me. It liberated me. The first breakthrough came late at night while reviewing old folders in my study. Among decades-old files, I found a renovation contract from 15 years ago, listing my name as the primary owner for structural changes because the funds used were inherited from my parents. That clause, buried in legal jargon, meant I held authority over any major alterations, including demolition. The realization didn't spark joy, it sparked clarity. Frederick assumed age made me powerless, but time had made me resourceful. I photocopied every document and sent them to Ms. Donnelly, who confirmed the loophole's validity. For the first time, I saw a path where I wasn't the victim. I was the strategist. The house he flaunted as a prize was suddenly legally vulnerable. Because of me, to execute my plan, I needed funds he couldn't trace. I searched through old statements and found dormant savings accounts, small but mine entirely. Then I discovered something more valuable, a joint investment portfolio we opened years ago, but I continued contributing alone after his interest faded. Ms. Donnelly confirmed those funds were legally protected as separate property once he abandoned financial contributions. It wasn't millions, but it was enough for my intentions. I withdrew portions carefully, in amounts small enough to avoid alerting Frederick or triggering inquiries. Money wasn't the motivation, it was the instrument. With every transfer, I felt control return to my hands, inch by inch. I approached contractors under my maiden name, posing as a widow interested in clearing land for a potential sale. I avoided anyone local, reaching out to firms in nearby towns unfamiliar with our family. Their questions were professional, not personal, and they didn't pry. I requested confidentiality and offered upfront payment, ensuring their discretion. Some declined the unusual timeline, but one firm agreed, no judgment, no curiosity. When they reviewed the legal documents granting me authority, they asked no further questions. The arrangements weren't impulsive, they were precise. Frederick wanted a new life, I wanted a clean slate. Every signature, every scheduled date tightened the noose of my silent revenge. Getting the permit was the biggest hurdle. City Hall clerks were used to routine renovations, not full demolition, but the documents Ms. Donnelly provided were airtight. The property's structural authority was in my name, and my reasoning, that the land was being prepared for sale, was plausible. The clerk approved the permit without ever contacting Frederick. I walked out holding a piece of paper that symbolized transformation. It wasn't just legal clearance, it was empowerment. He told me to be gone when he returned. He would get his wish, but not the way he imagined. The house we built together would cease to exist, not out of spite, but sovereignty. Inside the house were items I refused to let fall into his hands. I separated sentimental pieces, wedding albums, heirlooms, letters, from valuables he only admired for price. I sold jewelry, antique furniture, and artwork to reputable buyers through private dealers, keeping transactions anonymous. These sales weren't for profit, they were shields ensuring he couldn't reclaim them. I packed cherished items into a storage unit under a different address, leaving nothing recognizable for him to weaponize. The home grew emptier each day, quietly, deliberately. To anyone observing, it looked like downsizing. In truth, it was preparation for erasure. As demolition day neared, I walked through each room one last time. I touched the walls where our children once scribbled their heights. I folded quilts my mother stitched. I gathered photo albums, school certificates, and paintings made in my childhood. These memories didn't belong to Frederick, they belonged to me and the years I invested. I placed them carefully in my car, realizing sentimental value isn't tied to brick and mortar. The house wasn't the home, it was the vessel. And since he viewed it as disposable, I allowed myself to do the same. My past deserved respect. My grief deserved dignity. Last night was strangely peaceful. I slept in the living room on a blanket, surrounded by silence rather than sorrow. Moonlight filtered through the windows, casting familiar patterns on the floor. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. The decision to demolish was no longer an act of anger, it was closure. I whispered goodbye not to the building, but to the version of myself who endured neglect and disrespect. When dawn approached, I stood outside, taking one last look. The life we built together ended the moment he chose vanity over loyalty. The demolition would merely make the ending visible. At sunrise, engines rumbled to life. The demolition crew arrived in unmarked trucks, their faces expressionless and focused. I stood at a distance in my car, heart steady, not racing. The first strike of the wrecking ball echoed like thunder, shattering windows and memories alike. Walls that held arguments and apologies alike crumbled. The kitchen where I cooked for decades vanished in seconds. I expected grief, but instead I felt released. This wasn't destruction, it was transformation. I thought of Frederick promising a new life and realized I was granting him exactly that, just not in the form he expected. By mid-morning, the house was no longer recognizable. And for the first time in years, I breathed freely. Curiosity spreads fast. Neighbors stepped outside, shocked at the sight of $1 million home being reduced to rubble. Whispered conversations and bewildered stares followed as people realized whose house it was. Some thought it was an accident, others assumed foreclosure. A few approached the workers, only to be redirected politely. I watched from afar, remembering how many of those same neighbors advised me to accept aging gracefully or supported Frederick blindly. Now the narrative shifted. They didn't know the truth, but they witnessed the result. Their judgmental glances no longer affected me. Their shock was simply the first ripple of a consequence Frederick had created, one demolition at a time. By afternoon, news vans appeared. The sudden disappearance of such a prominent home drew reporters. Drones buzzed overhead capturing footage. Headlines speculated bankruptcy, family scandal, or redevelopment. No one imagined the quiet orchestration of a discarded wife. Journalists dug into property records but found legal permits signed under my name, creating confusion. Social media exploded with theories. Some called it genius. Others labeled it madness. Through it all, I remained invisible, just another spectator. Frederick wanted fame through his grand wedding. Instead, he earned notoriety through his absence. And with every broadcast, the public unknowingly prepared for the dramatic fallout awaiting his return. When our children returned from the wedding and saw the empty land, their laughter died instantly. Their suitcases dropped as they stared in disbelief at the barren plot where their childhood home once stood. My daughter cried, not out of grief but confusion, unable to reconcile her father's narrative of abandonment with the reality before her. My son raged, blaming me before understanding I had legal authority. They realized their support of Frederick wasn't just emotional, it was complicit. Their shock wasn't merely about the house. It was about witnessing the consequence of choosing convenience over loyalty. And for the first time, the power dynamic shifted. Frederick pulled up moments later, stepping out of his car with triumphant energy, until his eyes landed on the empty land. His face was drained of color. The younger bride's grin froze. He marched forward, demanding answers, but his voice trembled. When officials confirmed I held legal demolition rights, his bravado shattered. He sputtered accusations, calling me vindictive, insane, but the law wasn't on his side. The mansion he hoped to flaunt as marital triumph was gone, replaced by dust and humiliation. In his eyes, I saw the exact moment ego met consequence. Tessa wasn't prepared for reality. She screamed at Frederick, blaming him for lying about ownership and security. She accused him of ruining her dream wedding, her future lifestyle, and her social reputation. Reporters recorded everything as she hurled insults, ripping off her veil and throwing it into the dirt. She called him useless and old, echoing the cruelty he once used on me. The irony was poetic. Crowds watched as the illusion of their glamorous romance shattered. The woman he chose for youth and excitement exposed him publicly, not with grace but with fury. Their fairy tale evaporated under the weight of truth. When Frederick approached me, he was no longer triumphant, he was desperate. Demanded explanations, apologies, even restitution. I remained calm. I reminded him of his text, "Be gone when we return." I explained that I simply granted his wish. He argued I ruined his life. I countered that he abandoned mine. For every accusation, I had evidence. For every demand, I had rights. His voice cracked with panic, realizing he had no legal claim left. The crowd watched as power shifted, not through violence but clarity. I didn't need revenge. I needed closure. And in that confrontation, I achieved it. Humiliated and cornered, Frederick's first response was legal retaliation. He stormed into a courthouse the next morning, filing a lawsuit accusing me of malicious destruction and emotional distress. His attorney attempted to portray him as a victim, an abandoned husband whose deranged wife acted impulsively. But the courtroom wasn't swayed by theatrics. My lawyer calmly presented the demolition permit, financial investment records, and proof of joint ownership dating back decades. The judge scrutinized Frederick's claims, noting his overseas absence, abandonment, and documented text commanding me to leave. His case began collapsing before it even stood. The lawsuit wasn't an attack, it was a confession of panic. He clung to legal action because everything else had slipped from his grasp. The courtroom atmosphere shifted when the judge addressed property jurisdiction. Documents confirmed I contributed inheritance funds for renovations and retained structural authority rights. The demolition permit was lawful. The land remained shared, but the house, no longer standing, was not protected under any clause benefiting Frederick. The court acknowledged that emotional value couldn't override legal fact. For the first time, Frederick understood the weight of dismissing me. His entitlement had blinded him to signatures he once considered trivial. Those overlooked protections became my shield. The ruling didn't restore the house, it restored dignity. Ownership wasn't just about land, it was about reclaiming identity after being told you were disposable. Our children watched the legal proceedings with widening eyes. They had believed their father's narrative, that I was irrational, bitter, outdated. But as evidence unfolded, texts, financial records, abandonment, they saw truth they refused to acknowledge earlier. Their guilt surfaced. My daughter admitted she felt pressured to support her father to maintain his approval. My son's anger shifted, not toward me but toward Frederick for manipulating them. Their loyalty, once unquestioned, began to fracture. They realized they hadn't just chosen a side, they'd chosen convenience over conscience. And as the facade crumbled, they finally confronted the weight of their complicity. The fallout extended beyond courtroom walls. Neighbors whispered not about my demolition, but about Frederick's arrogance. Former friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with his scandal. His colleagues, once envious of his lifestyle, now laughed behind closed doors, mocking the man who returned from a honeymoon to an empty lot. Tessa's public meltdown became viral, amplifying ridicule. He was no longer admired, he was pitied or despised. The man who prided himself on status now avoided social events entirely, unable to face the judgmental eyes he once sought to impress. His social empire didn't just crack, it collapsed, brick by brick. With the house demolished and lawsuit failing, financial repercussions followed. Insurance wouldn't cover intentional destruction ordered by a legal owner. Contractors demanded remaining payments. Wedding expenses and travel costs drained savings. The younger bride, used to luxury, discovered the reality of debt and restitution. She blamed Frederick relentlessly, calling him irresponsible for not securing what he promised her. Banks re-evaluated loans based on unstable assets. Overnight, the wealth he flaunted became a burden. His dream of a new life morphed into overdue bills and declining credit. Money, once his weapon, became his punishment. Frederick, stripped of pride and financial security, finally faced something he avoided for years: introspection. Alone in a small temporary rental, devoid of admirers or validation, he confronted the truth of his actions. He realized I didn't destroy the house out of rage, but out of autonomy. He reflected on the years I supported him, the dreams we built, and how swiftly he discarded them for vanity. The mirror offered no excuses, only a man who believed youth could be purchased. His tears weren't for the house. They were for recognizing the emptiness beneath his choices and the family bonds he shattered. In the aftermath, family discussions finally turned to honesty. Our children, embarrassed by their earlier stance, asked difficult questions. Why did he leave? Why did he replace decades of partnership with a fantasy? And why did we enable him? For the first time, Frederick confessed, not publicly but privately. He admitted chasing youth to escape aging, fearing irrelevance, and mistaking desire for fulfillment. His confession didn't absolve him, but it exposed the human frailty beneath his arrogance. And as truth surfaced, the family dynamic shifted. Pity replaced admiration, and accountability replaced excuses. Take a second to like and subscribe, because what comes next isn't revenge. It's something far more powerful, and you won't see it coming. The final verdict shocked the courtroom. Although the demolition was legally permitted, the judge acknowledged emotional distress and ordered Frederick to compensate me for joint assets invested over the years. It wasn't about money, it was about acknowledgement. He had dismissed decades of labor, love, and sacrifice. Now the court documented them as facts, not memories. The compensation was substantial enough to provide security, but the greater victory was symbolic. The system recognized his abandonment and cruelty. When the gavel struck, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure beginning. For the first time, accountability, not vengeance, shaped the outcome. Frederick realized the consequences extended beyond a demolished house. They reached his legacy, his pride, and his bank account. After the ruling, society dealt its own verdict. Former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to risk association with scandal and financial instability. Invitations evaporated, and business opportunities disappeared. He tried to restore reputation through charity events and apologies, but the community remembered the man who discarded his wife for vanity, then accused her when consequences arrived. Gossip portrayed him as reckless and insecure rather than successful. Even Tessa's friends mocked the failed marriage and empty promises. Watching him lose the status he worshipped felt bittersweet, not because I enjoyed his downfall, but because it proved what I always knew. Character sustains reputation, not youth or wealth. His social throne crumbled, leaving him to face the world stripped of illusion. With compensation secured, I found a peaceful cottage on the outskirts of town, small but surrounded by a garden bursting with potential. For the first time in decades, I decorated a space entirely for myself. Soft colors, shelves of books, and a kitchen designed for joy rather than obligation. I planted roses and lavender, reclaiming beauty on my own terms. Neighbors greeted me kindly, knowing my past but not defining me by it. The quiet mornings, fresh tea, and freedom felt foreign at first, then comforting. I didn't rebuild my old life, I built a new one free from criticism, comparison, or conditional affection. Independence wasn't lonely, it was liberating. Eventually, my children came, not with entitlement but humility. They apologized for abandoning me and believing their father's narrative. They shared how witnessing the aftermath forced them to confront their own choices. They asked to rebuild our relationship, not as a replacement for the past, but as acknowledgement of their mistakes. I didn't accept immediately. Trust needed time, and respect required consistency. But I opened the door. Family isn't about perfection, it's about accountability and growth. Their attempt at reconciliation didn't erase pain, yet it planted seeds of hope. Healing began not with apologies, but with changed behavior and genuine remorse. Frederick approached me one final time, requesting another chance, claiming he had changed. He blamed midlife crisis, loneliness, and misguided pride, but I saw through the desperation. He didn't want reconciliation, he wanted comfort from the consequences. I listened respectfully, then declined, not with anger but certainty. Our marriage ended long before demolition when he chose vanity over loyalty. I didn't need revenge or validation, I simply needed freedom. And turning him away was not punishment, it was closure, asserting that respect, once broken, cannot be rebuilt on regret alone. I embraced hobbies once dismissed: painting, gardening, volunteering. I joined a local community center, teaching financial literacy to older women navigating divorce or abandonment. I shared knowledge, not bitterness, because strength is multiplied when shared. Friendships blossomed, not out of pity but connection. I traveled modestly, cherished quiet mornings, and rediscovered laughter. Life didn't return to what it was. It became something better, intentional. My identity was no longer tethered to being a wife or mother. It was mine, self-defined, self-made, and self-valued. The story didn't end with revenge, it ended with peace. I didn't rebuild the house or seek public praise. I allowed silence and dignity to speak for me. Frederick's legacy became a cautionary tale, mine became resilience. The greatest victory wasn't demolition, it was transformation. I walked away not as a victim or avenger, but as a woman who rediscovered her worth. My closure wasn't loud, it was firm, graceful, and empowering. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole.